It's been a trend in baseball that we have seen really rapidly accelerating since, I want to say 2000, but I think it's probably even more clear since about 2010 that not only are starting pitcher innings in general down, but the starting pitcher wins are much down as a result of that. We do not see guys racking up wins nearly in the same degree.
No, and the main reason obviously has to do with the amount that guys pitch in the first place. So, you go back to when the pitcher pitched the whole game in the beginning of modern baseball. I took a look at the 1902 Red Sox. Okay, Cy Young was on that team. Anyway, the starting pitchers accounted for 71 of the 77 Red Sox. They only played 138 games, so they were a good team still. But that's 92%. Okay, 100 years later, 2002, I looked at the Angels.
Yep.
Okay, their starters, including Mickey Callaway, who had starts for the Angels won the World Series that year, which shocked me.
I had no idea.
Former later on Mets manager and failed Mets manager, yes. I think. They had less than 50% of the total wins were carded by starting pitchers.
That was just that team because we can look at league average. So from 2014, starters accounted for 70% of teams' wins in 2014. Last year in 2023, starters accounted for 59% of teams' wins. That's a lot. That's a big drop that you're seeing here. We also saw big drops in the number of quality starts. We went down from 54 in 2014 to 35% in 2023. And we went down in 7 innings pitched plus starts. We went down from 31% in 2014 to 11% in 2023.
Let's talk for a second just about the quality start thing. By the way, who was the genius that came up with that? Like, he had to be like an agent for pitchers or something like that. Like, okay, you can give up, the criteria is 3 runs or less given up in 6 innings.
I thought it was 2 or less.
No, it's 3.
It's 3.
So that would be pitching to a 4.50 ERA, which amongst us traditional baseball, like that's not a fantastic pitcher if he's got a 4.50 ERA. It's a league average pitcher right now.
Exactly. If you had a guy,
so how's that a quality start?
Well, because if he did that every week, if your pitcher went out there every single start and gave you 6 innings and 3 runs or less, and remember, the thing is, yes, it's 3 runs or less. When you say it's a 4.50 ERA, that's assuming he's giving up the full 3 runs every time. There's going to be starts where he doesn't. But if you had a guy, if you told a team, yeah, this guy will go out you and give you 30 quality starts this year, every team would sign that guy.
By the way, those 1902 Red Sox, they had 117 complete games out of 138. So you talk about the game is so different, and that's why you won't see the 20-game winners.
Right.
You probably are barely seeing 15.
And part of that is just it's about the option. So back in 1902, there probably wasn't a better option at pitcher than the guy that started the game at any other point.
Anytime Cy Young has a right arm, he's the best guy to go out there and pitch.
Right. The only time, as long as he didn't pitch the day before, you need to use a different guy.
And even then.
Right. But that's part of the problem is that now, back then, 85% of your starting pitcher was better than any reliever you had in your bullpen. Now, I don't know if 95% of your starter is enough.
95%, that's saying something.
Well, look at the trend. If we look at the four-seam fastball velocity by inning in 2023, you see it drop off inning by inning until it hits the 5th. Then by the 6th, it's catching back up to the 1st. And then the 7th, 8th, and 9th on, they're throwing harder than they've been throwing at any point in the game. So what that tells me is that if you're a team looking to score, the middle of the game is where you're looking to do it, which is, I think, why we're seeing starting pitchers not really make it past the 5th inning a lot of the time.
And what's different today, obviously, and I seem to harp on this about the video, the ability for the hitters to sort of look at their at bats and whatnot during, in the clubhouse and in the tunnel in the game, is that they won't be facing that pitcher a lot of times the 3rd time through the order. So the managers, unless you have a stud pitcher, are very hesitant to let their guy face. And so the amount of batters they face has dropped down from 26 over the years to 25. I think it's about, as of last year, in the 22 range per starting pitchers, how many batters they face.
And yeah, exactly. 20 years ago, it was 25. 30 years ago, it was 26. So you were almost guaranteed facing the guys three times.
Now you're barely getting the 3rd. That you're getting, and it's interesting because at 22, that kind of means that you're getting through the top 4 hitters of the lineup the 3rd time. That's kind of interesting because you think they would well, I don't even want to do that.
Right, but probably better than you would have to bring in people too early to completely prevent facing anybody the 3rd time through the lineup, because then at most you could only ever get 6 innings.
Right.
That's if he's thrown a perfect 6 innings.
So your stud starters start about 32 games a season. That's pretty much the standard, and you rarely will see a pitcher throw more than that. I can't remember the last time I saw a pitcher in today's baseball throw more than 32 starts in a
Right, you're
season.
not seeing guys get in the 35 range or higher like they used to.
But that's how you won 20 games, and we talked about pitcher wins and things like that. That's how you did those things.
One of the biggest changes is just the amount of rest that the pitchers get now. Guys throw way more often on 5 days rest than they used to. And so that significantly decreases the number of starts you're going to get if you're waiting an extra game essentially between all of your starts.
And you try to find ways to get guys an extra day every now and again, right? By sometimes even having a 6th starter come in and pick up a start.
It's become more and more common just because we need these guys to last, and they're required to throw at such incredible intensities that they can't you can't cruise through games anymore. I really get the impression that as a pitcher back in the day, not so much that you weren't trying, but like there were parts of the lineup where, like, we were watching the game yesterday, just
Perfect
as an
example.
example.
I was thinking the same thing.
And they were talking about how something was a fastball count, and you could just throw. It was 2-0, and you could just
That's a fastball count,
right? You just throw
because he couldn't throw his off-speed pitches as reliably for strikes,
and
so
probably
he knew he could throw that for a strike.
And you weren't so worried that the guy at the plate was going to do something with that fastball, unless it was one of the couple guys in the lineup that really frightened you. And then that was your job as the pitcher, was to not get into the 2-0 count on that guy. Now, you can't get into 2-0 count on anybody, and if you do, you can't just pump a fastball because it's 2-0, because they'll crush it if they know a fastball's coming.
And actually, I think it's Iglesias who found that out, because so here's the game yesterday: the Braves and the Mets. Max Fried, my pick for Cy Young winner, who hadn't had a great start to the season, had a Maddox in there, but not great. Of course, yesterday against the Mets,
goes no-hitter
and throws no hitter through 7 innings, just so classically Mets and Braves. And so, but through 7 innings, Fried's got about 100 pitches, a little over 100 pitches, and he doesn't come out for the 8th inning. Now, to the baseball fan, that's heretical, right? Like, what do you mean you had a no-hitter? How could you not come out and pitch?
Is it really worth, like, I always...
It's not. They're trying to win the world championship, not throw a no-hitter.
Exactly, and I look no further than Johan Santana getting ruined by the Mets, throwing 130-something pitches in that game to get that first no-hitter.
But we needed that no-hitter so much.
But we lost Johan Santana forever to get
But he doesn't blame Terry anymore.
No.
He never did.
He never did. But as a team, you're like, that. Well, we ruined an investment that way.
Well, and I think he's probably one of the poster children, right, for here's what you don't do. So the Braves yesterday are looking at Max Fried. So Max Fried goes out of the game. They get the 8th inning. They have no hits. They get to the 9th inning, and there's 2 outs in the 9th inning, and Iglesias says, I'm just going to throw a fastball to J.D. Martinez, who says, yeah, I'll take care of that one.
Yeah, exactly. It was like a 2-0. I think it was first pitch fastball, and he just took it the other way.
You can't do that even against against today's hitters.
Right, exactly. And I think you just don't have guys in the lineup, especially with the elimination of the pitcher slot. Because let's be realistic: if you were a National League pitcher, you were throwing to 8 hitters a game your entire career.
Right.
And realistically, for a lot of the years,
it was 7. Right. There was that shortstop hitting 7th who you're like, oh, yeah, we could 8th.
He was hitting like 200.
Exactly. The Mendoza line wasn't called that for nothing.
Right, exactly. So if you had only pitched to 7 guys a game, that would totally change.
And those are the guys that Ron Darling would say that you could cruise through. When you talk about cruising, like, okay, I got to get to the bottom of the lineup because I can take a few pitches off, whichever. Like, there's none of that today. Right, Number one, the DH, obviously in the American League and now in both leagues, that's, forget it. There's no relief in that. And so you talk about the actual recording of the win, and so you're not going to get 20 wins. But the question is it important in a team sport like baseball that we award one guy the win?
Well, I think we need to start from a place of how is the win even awarded? Because I think that's not something that's particularly clear. I mean, for a starting pitcher, it's clear. A starting pitcher needs to pitch 5 2/3 innings, I believe.
No, 5 innings.
Just 5 innings.
But it wasn't that way until 1950 codified. So actually, there was discretion even more than there is now.
There is still discretion in the current system.
Right.
So if the starting pitcher pitches 5 innings, and when he leaves the game, his team has the lead.
That they never relinquish.
Now, I do want to just clarify something. So let's say a guy leaves the game and it's 3-2. His team then goes up 5-2. The opposing team scores 2 runs, and then the game ends. Does he still get the
Absolutely.
win? Okay.
Absolutely, because
that's an important thing
he's
to
a pitcher
clarify.
of record.
Right, even though they scored
more runs than he gave up, if you will.
Right.
But that's not the criteria.
They gave up more runs than he allowed. I just wanted to clarify that. So if the starting pitcher does not achieve 5 innings, or when he leaves the game, his team is either tied or not in the lead, then it will go to the pitcher of record if the team
Right, it's easy to reward the win to a relief pitcher if in there the team comes back. If they're behind, they win. He gets the win. Right. Or if they lose the lead, they lose the lead that the starting pitcher had, and they tie the game and they lose the game. He can still be the losing pitcher too.
But then if there's no good particular person to select from that, it is then up to the discretion of the scorer to award the win to the reliever they felt was the most impactful.
Right, that's correct.
And which means we already have a completely subjective way to award wins already in the system. So now, why do we have this system where we have half rules, but then we have a little back door out that we can be but we can also just change it around and do whatever we want?
Tyler Kepner wrote a nice piece in The Athletic where he had that question. He came up with a scenario where a pitcher, had a 2-1 lead, and he basically was the best pitcher of the game because after that, they scored a bunch of runs and the other team, kind of caught up but never really caught up. But he didn't pitch the 5 innings. None of the other relievers distinguished themselves, and so then he can't award. He should be able to award the pitcher to the most effective pitcher in the game, which was the starter who just didn't happen to pitch 5 innings.
Mm-hmm. And so I think it's really interesting when we look at wins as a statistic. It's a statistic we've talked about already in this podcast as one where it's we're kind of awarding a individual player a win when it is a team game, for one. Secondly, it's not really a particularly good measure of effectiveness because there's a lot of factors in getting the win that are completely out of the pitcher's control. You can pitch a wonderful game, but if your team didn't score, you don't get a win.
Right, and Jacob deGrom, had a lot of that because he won a Cy Young doing that. And 2 of them.
And a lot of people point to Felix Hernandez winning his Cy Young as sort of the death of the win being.
It was 04 or something like that.
I think it was later than that. I don't think it was
2010. You're right.
But I think it's just really interesting with wins because I think wins for evaluating a player in a given season, I don't think it's a particularly great statistic because we all know that every year it seems like there's one random reliever. We get to June. That's 6-0 or something.
Reed Garrett was 4-0 for the Mets this year,
Right, and nobody's
more wins than any Mets starter.
Right, but nobody's going to look at Reed Garrett and go, "Oh yeah, he's really
what a season he had."
I mean, he is having a good season, but not because he's got 4 wins.
He's pitched 19 innings too,
right,
or
exactly.
20 innings. Right,
so he just happens to pitch in important situations, and the Mets have come from behind. So I think wins aren't great for looking at any one individual pitcher's season and being how good was it necessarily. Obviously, if a guy puts up 20 wins, that's generally pretty impressive. But there's a slew of guys that had one random 20-win season and that weren't that great. So just looking at any one season worth of wins, I think doesn't really tell you the picture. I think wins are good for tracking how great a pitcher's career is.
I think there's historical connective tissue, and we all know that no one's ever going to win,
300,
500 games like Cy Young won, or even 300. To your point, 200 might be the new 300.
200 is the new 300,
but I'm not even 100% sure that that's going to last. So, how we evaluate pitchers, wins recorded by a pitcher are just one criteria. We're much better at understanding.
And if you look at
that
a guy
is not the only
who's
criteria.
Racked up 180 wins in his career, you don't do that by accident.
In this day and age.
Right. That's not something you can't compile wins like you used to, where you went out every 4 days, threw 7 innings, and if your team won, you got the win. It's not quite that way anymore.
And it's an anomaly, right? Then you have a season like R.A. Dickey had in 2012, right? Remember, that was a Cy Young year for a pretty lousy Met team.
Won 20-something.
He won over 20 games with his knuckleball and had just an extraordinary season. But if you looked at it from afar, it's wow, he had a really good season. They won 20 games. The Mets must have been good. They weren't.
Right. So, and if you look at that doesn't. I think for me, one of the things I've kind of come to believe in is that wins are really good for looking at a career. Quality starts is really good for looking at pitchers in the aggregate and letting you know how good somebody has or was in a given year. Because you might have a guy that gave you a ton of really good starts and his team just didn't score in a lot of them. So it's he only went 8-5, but if you actually look at his stats, he was really good. It's not his fault that his team didn't score.
I don't think we're advocating that the win should disappear, but there's an argument to be made that it's pretty irrelevant in a lot of ways.
I think there's an argument to be made that we should look at how we award the wins. And I think there's an argument to be made that it's just not the be-all, end-all of oh, yeah, if you're a good starting pitcher, you get a ton of wins. Generally, that's true, but it's not always true.
But the pitchers, when you say you're going to run a guy out there hopefully 32 times because he doesn't get hurt, and they won 2/3 of his starts, even though he didn't win 24 games.
Right, that tells you. Right, he didn't win 20. He didn't get the win in 20 of those starts. They still went 24-8 in the games he started. That guy was hugely impactful for that team, most likely.
Right, which is another argument, I think, why we should allow the official scorer to award the win to the starting pitcher, even if he doesn't pitch 5 innings.
It should just be the start. I mean, we already allow them the discretion. So if you're comfortable with them having the discretion to award it to a reliever, based on who they think was the most effective, there's no reason to just not give them the discretion for the whole game instead of having slight arbitrary guidelines and then being able to throw your hands up and be like, actually, you can just give it to whoever you want.
So let's say a pitcher goes out and he pitches 4 2/3 innings. He doesn't give up any runs, and the team is up 6-0 or something like that. And then he leaves the game, and then the reliever number 1 goes in, gives up 2 runs. The other guy gives up a run. They give up the Mets. The team adds a couple of runs. Okay, so they're up now 8-6 or 5. 7-3 and then finally the game ends 9-7, and none of the relievers did anything good. Okay, the official scorer goes, well, the guy didn't pitch 5 innings, so I can't give it to the starting pitcher, who was by far the most effective guy in the game.
So
I'm going to give it to that guy.
Yeah, so just give it to, just relax the rules around it. Where there's no more because we just don't play the same game where guys are throwing that many innings. Back in the day, throwing less than 5 innings was a mark of shame.
Right. So, and in fact, the pitchers even today, look, if you ask,
all of them want to go.
Zach Eflin's like,
innings.
look, I know I got to go 5 innings or more, 6. I got to give I don't want to kill my bullpen, so I know it's worth more. But when it comes to recording the win, none of these starting pitchers are going to say, I don't think it's important, because they still get paid to a certain degree on the amount of wins they card.
Quality starts might help you get paid. But wins, if you're a pitcher, you would much rather be a guy that went 12-3 in a season than a guy that went 7-4 but had a bunch of quality starts.
And we make adjustments here where we change the way we look at things statistically and how we measure stuff. There's an argument also to be made, as Tyler Kepner suggested in his article, that maybe a 4-inning starting pitcher, you're pitching almost half the game, whatever. So you're 44% of the game if you complete 4 innings. Maybe that should be enough to have him qualify, so we can at least take some of the power away from this. The official score, like number 1, who is picking? We know that Major League Baseball endorses the official scores, but you just wonder: is there a standardization of how the official scores do things? I don't think so.
I trust that they generally want to do what's right.
Absolutely. Look, we sit together and we watch ball games, right? And I see an error in the field, or what I think is an error, and I'm going, "That's an error." The official score says it's a hit. Darn, I don't see it that way, and whatnot. So that's the same dilemma they have to go through.
And I think another reason why we've also seen a decrease in starting pitchers is that we've seen a crazy uptick in starting pitcher injuries. So if we look back at 2015, there were 313 starting pitchers used in that season by major league teams. 72 of them were on the IL at various points throughout the year, so about 23%. Last year in 2023, there were only 232 starting pitchers used.
Oh, right.
Because of all of the openers and stuff. 98 of them ended up on the IL, 42%. So what that's telling me is half of the starting pitchers are ending up on the IL throughout the course of the season. You're just going to have less pitching wins as a result because guys aren't going to play the whole season.
And to nobody's surprise, if you saw what happened early this season in 2024, all we saw was one quality starter, big-time starter, going down after another. And you've still got a guy like Garrett Cole who hasn't even made a start yet.
Exactly.
So
those numbers from 2023 were not from the full season yet, but it was just to kind of give you an idea that that's how many had already ended up. In 2022, just over the course of the full season, 167 players ended up on the IL out of 367, so 45.5%.
So we're tracking close to 50% of the guys are going on the IL.
Right.
How do you run a team when half of your starters are going to be on the injured list?
That's just brutal.
And that happens every year, so you can't have too much pitching. So you really need to have 6, 7, 8 guys that could.
Because that guys are going to be on the IL at various points during the year. It's just going to happen.
But the 7th and 8th starters are kind of like the old middle reliever.
Right.
Like the guy you didn't really want to pitch.
Right. And when those guys are picking up starts instead of better starting pitching wins go down.
So, and I think I saw this from the same Sports Illustrated article. From 2015 through 2022, starts lasting 7 innings were cut in half. That's only 8 years. Mm-hmm. And so a 7-inning start, which, I think most of us would say, if the pitcher gets you through 7 innings.
It's a good start.
Man, that's good. That really, and you're winning. You have done your job as a pitcher.
Oh, you've done more than
you don't need to do anything. So the percentage of starts going 7 innings will continue to go down for reasons we've already described. And so pitcher wins will go down accordingly with that. And that's what we're seeing.
Yeah. It's just really interesting, and I'm kind of curious to see over time how it changes. Will Major League Baseball change how the wins are given out? And starting pitchers are certainly going to be in favor of that because they get paid based off of that. So I think it's the kind of thing that could end up changing pretty easily because all parties are interested in it. And even baseball would probably prefer being able to advertise the fact that there's 20-game winners again because people like that. And being able to talk about the starting pitcher getting tons of wins is good for baseball.
I don't see it, man. I don't see it. I think I saw something that said that the average amount of pitches for a starter in a start this year is 86. I mean, now we're not going back to the time
last year it was 87.
When David Cohn threw like 200 pitches in a game or something like that, which was still not that long ago that could even happen. That somebody could throw 200 pitches in a game today
would never happen.
You'd be arrested for abuse, or something, by the agent of the pitcher.
I think it's not even that. You would never get a guy that could be effective at that many pitches. By the time he got up to like 120, he's probably not throwing good enough anymore that the guys are just going to start teeing off on him, or he's going to be nowhere near the strike zone.
I mean, because we're Met fans, and you mentioned the Johan Santana no-hitter. How many pitches did he throw in that game?
It was 137.
134, right. So we know how many pitches he threw in that game because it was so many.
Right, and we romanticize that for some reason.
Right, and yet it affected his career. And so the problem is that because, and we say this all the time, guys have to pitch so competitively through every at-bat in the lineup, those 86 pitches are like 120 pitches when you didn't have to pitch to those other guys. So, I don't think we can fix and grow a whole bunch of 20-game winners out of the current scenario, but I do think there come some changes that could allow guys that will get more wins and make it, because it's still sexy to be the winning pitcher.
Right, exactly. Maybe we not get to 20, but 15 to 18 doesn't sound too bad.